Hi there, welcome back to Grace Contemplating. Today we're picking up in Genesis chapter 4 again, right after Cain had received his punishment for murdering his brother, and he'd left to go to the land of Nod, east of Eden. It's the genealogies of Cain and then the genealogies of Adam, and we're going to see if there's anything that we can make sense out of this passage. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. By the time we get to Lamech, we are at the 7th generation from Adam. Now, there's a lot we don't understand about how the ancient Hebrews thought about numbers, but we do know that certain numbers were highly significant, and one of them was 7. It was sort of this idea of completeness, fullness, or reaching perfection. Now, what might happen when you reach perfection or completion in the line of Cain? Let's find out. Lamech took 2 wives. So here we have the first mention of polygamy in the scriptures, which is not endorsed, merely tolerated in some places and clearly condemned in others. Lamech took 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. So this is interesting because now what you have is Lamech, who is the 7th from Cain. We have civilization of man coming. So we've got somebody who is sort of a nomad, right? You've got tents and taking care of sheep and goats and livestock. And then you have somebody else who plays the pipe and the lyre. This is civilization. This is humankind growing. So that doesn't sound so bad so far. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. Okay, so now we have people who are beginning to work in metallurgy. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. That's an interesting fact. So here we have what sounds like the growth of human civilization. Cain starts a city. Most likely it was a village or a collection of houses surrounded by some kind of fence, right? Not a city like DC. And that city then was a place where they had the time to pursue growth as humans, which is something that's a good thing. I also want you to note that the term father, obviously there is no belief that Jubal was the father of everybody who plays musical instruments, right? They're not all his descendants, but it's more the concept of he's the one who began this path. And that does matter, I think, when you're looking at some genealogies and other things, because the concept of fatherhood does not always mean biological fatherhood the way that we think it does. Okay, enough on that. Let's see what completion in the line of Cain means. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. So now he's doing poetry. When did we hear poetry last? We heard poetry back when Eve was created, when Adam exclaimed, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, right? He was so enamored by this beautiful thing that he burst into poetry. Lamech has a perversion of that poetry right here. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. So what we have is not just growth in human knowledge, but a corruption of what is considered beautiful and right. He considers himself justified in killing people for tiny offenses. It's a very violent world. Somebody struck him and somebody wounded him, but he responded by killing them both. And to him, that is a badge of honor. And he's saying, Cain, well, remember, God told Cain, if anybody kills you, then my vengeance on them will be 7-fold. And now Lamech is saying, well, then, I killed 2 people. It's 70 times 7, or 77-fold. So it's super completeness. It's that magic number 7 again. So the ultimate conclusion, when you have a heritage of sin in which you allow it to constantly warp your perspective, the ultimate conclusion of that is calling evil good. And that's what Lamech is doing here. He's calling evil good. Cain didn't go that far. He just refused to admit he'd done anything evil. But Lamech is like, what I did is right. I'm justified. And you know God's going to be good with me and he'll protect me. So it's a complete perversion. On the other hand, though, we go back in time, back before that whole genealogy of Cain. And now we're going to look at Adam. Adam knew his wife again after Cain killed Abel. And she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. So God has again blessed the line of Adam and Eve because he said, there's going to be an opportunity for your line to crush the head of the serpent. That must happen. So now we have Seth. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enoch. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So there's some distance now between God and people, created by the fact that people have sinned in every generation and they're pulling away from God. But in the line of Adam and Seth, they recognize that their salvation comes through God and they're beginning to call on him. Okay, so let's go into the next chapter here, Genesis chapter 5. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man, or humanity, when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. Okay, so this is an important point. Remember, God made Adam in his image, but Seth is now in the image of Adam. So in the meantime, Adam has made a choice to rebel against God. And while clearly he's not corrupt the way Cain is, he's still tainted by sin. So Seth is born into Adam's image, which is God's image, but is also someone who sins, someone who rebels, and is going to have a tendency to move towards that side of evil choice. And that's one of the important points here, is that anyone after this is tainted by that same image, that same proclivity to sin. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. The ages, they're very confusing. I'm not sure whether I believe that they are real or not. There are some who claim that they were, that it's because Adam had eaten from the tree of life, and so the people after them had long life. It just wasn't forever because they didn't keep eating from the tree of life. That's one approach to it. Another is that these ages are somehow symbolic in a way that has been lost to time. There are plenty of suggestions as to what the symbolism could be. You can find a lot of that. Certainly the idea that maybe it's base 60, and so you need to look at things that are measured in intervals of 60, which would be 5 years. And they're trying to see if it means something. Like, are we saying that certain people had a particular spiritual value because of how many sevens can be put into their numbers? I don't know. So there's a whole bunch of argument as to whether these are real numbers or not. I would say let's not get caught up on it. What really matters, I think, is this pattern. We have someone who lives, we have someone who has children, and then finally we have someone who dies. That pattern exists all the way through the genealogy with one exception. And that's important, I think, because the point is that these are real people who lived and died. And we want to highlight the one who is outside of the normal pattern. So we have Seth fathering Enosh, and then we have Enosh fathering Kenan. We have Kenan fathering Mahalalel. You see how it keeps going. They all lived and then they died. They lived and then they died. And then we get to Enoch. Now, Enoch is the seventh. Remember Lamech being the seventh under Cain, bringing it to fullness and completion? Well, now we have Enoch being the seventh. So this is sort of the pinnacle of potential in a sense, in a symbolic sense. So Enoch fathered Methuselah. And then we have this line, verse 22. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. To me, that being a solar year sounds really significant, but I think we just don't know what it means. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Everybody else dies, but not Enoch. Enoch's a very important figure in other parts of the scripture as well. He's mentioned several times because he is sort of the polar opposite of Lamech. Lamech has romanticized sin. He is calling evil good, but Enoch is seeking after God to the point that he walks with him, and suddenly he ceases to exist. He doesn't die. He's just not there anymore because God took him home. And that suggests that there is something in this line of people where calling upon the name of the Lord will eventually restore a relationship with the Lord. That's the whole point of this genealogy, is that God is working towards the promise of fulfillment, that a relationship with him can be restored. And along the way, we see these moments when those relationships demonstrate that potential, and Enoch is one of them. Methuselah is the one that has the oldest age, 969 years, but he also dies. And then there's a different Lamech, not Cain's Lamech, a different one, Methuselah's son. And Lamech calls the name of his son Noah, so you know what comes next. But here's what's interesting. Lamech says about Noah, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech had other children, and his days were 777 years, and he died. So now we have reached the conclusion, the perfect completion of the genealogy between Adam and Noah. There's that 777. It's just too significant a number to me to think that it's a literal age. I really believe it's symbolic. The purpose of this entire genealogy is to communicate spiritual truth. The spiritual aspect is that we see the fulfillment of the choices of iniquity and the choices of righteousness in these two genealogies. And that Noah is going to be bringing us a new chapter. Things are going to change. There will be a relief from the curse. In the future, somebody is going to come that will crush the seed of the serpent.